6 months after Kalos Prime, the swarm returned with a vengeance. They hit 12 colonies simultaneously, using tactics they had learned from their defeat. This time they weren't testing the Union's defenses. They were trying to break them completely. The Galactic Union mobilized every available military asset. Battle fleets deployed across multiple sectors. Defense stations went on high alert. Emergency protocols activated on 1,000 worlds. But everyone knew the truth. The Union was losing. The swarm adapted faster than anyone expected, learning to counter weapons and tactics within hours instead of days. In the council chambers, panic was setting in. Representatives shouted proposals at each other while their worlds burned. Some suggested retreat to fortified core systems. Others proposed negotiation, though the swarm had never shown interest in talking. A few even mentioned surrender. Then the human delegation arrived. Thalrix was present when they entered the council chambers. 5 humans in military uniforms led by a general named Taiwan. He was an older man with gray hair and a face that had seen too many battles. He didn't wait for permission to speak. He walked to the center of the hall and addressed the council directly. "We hear you're having trouble with the swarm," General Taiwan said. "We'd like to help." The council speaker looked irritated. "Humanity has already committed troops to the defense. Your forces are engaged on 3 fronts. We'd like to commit more, a lot more. How many troops are you offering?" "All of them. Every soldier, every ship, every weapon we have. We're putting our entire military at the Union's disposal." Silence fell across the chamber. Other species maintained careful balance between Union service and national defense. Nobody committed everything. It was too risky. What if the war went badly? What if enemies attacked their homeworlds while their forces were deployed elsewhere? That's unprecedented, the council speaker managed. "Why would you risk everything?" General Taiwan's answer was simple. "Because that's what you do when your friends need help. You show up." The 1st Terran Expeditionary Force deployed 3 days later. 20,000 human soldiers, 600 ships, and enough weapons to level a small moon. Thalrix was assigned as a military liaison to the force, tasked with helping humans coordinate with Union command structures. He reunited with familiar faces. Sergeant Daewon commanded a company now, leading troops with the same quiet competence he had shown at Kalos Prime. Lieutenant Hei Jin had been promoted to captain and ran tactical operations. Even young Sunwoo was there, no longer the scared private but a confident soldier who trained new recruits. "How's the arm?" Thalrix asked Sunwoo during the deployment briefing. The young man flexed his prosthetic limb. "Better than the original. Stronger too. The engineers back home built it with combat specs. You could have retired, taken a medical discharge." "I could have," Sunwoo agreed. "But then I'd be letting them down. Young Su, the captain, all the others. They died so I could live. The least I can do is make that mean something." The Expeditionary Force's first engagement was at the Talak Junction, a critical hyperspace nexus connecting 3 major sectors. The swarm had assembled a massive armada there, preparing to push deep into Union space. Union intelligence estimated the enemy force at over 50,000 ships supported by ground troops numbering in the millions. Union command calculated the battle odds at 3% chance of victory. They prepared evacuation protocols and started marking Talak Junction as lost territory. Then they showed the numbers to General Taiwan. 3%, the general said, studying the tactical display. "I've worked with worse. General, we should evacuate. Save the forces for defending the core systems. No, we hold here. If they take Talak Junction, they can hit a dozen worlds simultaneously. Better to stop them here where we can choose the battlefield." "It's suicide," General Taiwan smiled. It was the same smile Captain Byung-ho had given before the last stand at Kalos Prime. "Maybe. But history is full of people who succeeded at suicide missions. Let's join them." The Battle of Talak Junction began badly. The swarm outnumbered Union forces 5-1. Their ships were faster and more adaptive than before. Within the first hour, Union casualties were catastrophic. 3 capital ships destroyed, dozens of frigates crippled, and ground forces being pushed back on every front. Then the humans did something unexpected. They stopped defending and started attacking. Sergeant Daewon led his company in a direct assault on a swarm command ship. They didn't try to disable it from range or bombard it with artillery. They boarded it. Daewon and his soldiers fought through the ship room by room, shooting swarm creatures at point-blank range until they reached the bridge. Then they detonated charges that destroyed the entire vessel. Why? A Velkari commander asked Thalrix, watching the tactical display in confusion. Why sacrifice troops to destroy one ship? Because that ship was coordinating the swarm's southern flank, Thalrix explained. And because now the other swarm ships are confused. They're adapting, yes, but adaptation takes time. Even a few minutes of chaos can change a battle. Across the battlefield, human units were doing the same thing. They targeted command ships, supply lines, and communication nodes. They didn't try to win through superior firepower. They won by making the enemy's advantages meaningless. Captain He Jin coordinated the main assault from a command frigate. She studied the enemy patterns, identified weaknesses, and sent strike teams to exploit them. When other commanders hesitated, she pushed forward. When they suggested retreat, she found another angle of attack. The humans are insane, a Thoros officer muttered, watching the battle unfold. No, Thalrix corrected. They're creative. They've spent their entire history fighting enemies that should have defeated them. They've learned how to win when winning is impossible. The turning point came when Private Sun Wu spotted something in the swarm formation. A gap in their defensive perimeter, barely visible on the tactical sensors. Most commanders would have missed it or dismissed it as a trap, but Sun Wu had learned from the best. Captain, he reported to He Jin, I've got something. Sector 7-3, Mark 4-5. There's a gap in their formation. He Jin studied it. It's probably a trap. Probably. But maybe not. Captain Byung-ho always said sometimes you have to take risks. He Jin smiled. He did say that. All right, Sun Wu. Let's see if you're right. All units prepare for Assault Vector 7-3. We're going through that gap. They were right. It wasn't a trap. It was a mistake. The swarm had focused so heavily on adapting to Union tactics that they'd created a blind spot in their own formation. Human forces punched through, striking at the heart of the swarm armada. The battle raged for 18 hours. At the end, the swarm retreated, leaving behind thousands of destroyed ships and countless dead. Union forces had won, but at terrible cost. 30% casualties, dozens of ships destroyed, thousands of soldiers dead, but they had won. General Taewan stood on the bridge of his flagship looking at the wreckage floating in space. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded once, as if confirming something he'd always known. Get me casualty reports. I want to know every name. Every single one. The victory at Talek Junction changed the war. The swarm still attacked, still adapted, still killed. But they were cautious now. They had learned that humans didn't respect impossible odds. That humans would find ways to win that didn't make sense. That fighting humans was expensive, even when you won. Over the next months, human tactical doctrine spread through Union forces. Not just the techniques, but the mindset. Other species started to understand what Thalrix had witnessed at Kalos Prime. War wasn't just about technology or numbers. It was about will. About the decision to keep fighting when every logical reason said to quit. The phrase human determination became military shorthand. It meant refusing to accept defeat. It meant fighting for each other instead of just following orders. It meant turning last stands into victories and defeats into legends. Thalrix documented everything. He wrote reports, recorded interviews, and collected stories from soldiers across the Union. He was working on something bigger now. Not just a battle report, but a chronicle. The story of how humans changed galactic warfare. How they taught ancient species new ways to fight. How they turned their weaknesses into strengths and their defeats into inspiration. He called it, The Day I Fought Beside Humans, and witnessed the rise of legends. A year after Kalos Prime, Thalrix received permission to visit Earth. He wanted to see the human homeworld to understand where this species came from. The planet was smaller than he expected and mostly covered in water. But it was beautiful in a way that reminded him of the humans themselves, fragile but resilient, soft but strong. He visited Captain Byung-ho's family in a small city near the coast. The captain's daughter was 10 years old now, with her father's eyes and her mother's smile. Her name was So-jin, and she greeted Thalrix at the door with curiosity instead of fear. "You're the alien my dad saved," she said. "I am. Your father was a great warrior. He taught me what courage truly means. Will you teach me to fight like him?" Thalrix knelt down so he could look her in the eyes. All 4 of his arms rested on the ground, a sign of respect in Velkari culture. "I cannot teach you to fight like a human. Your father's courage came from something." Thalrix had seen many worlds in his time as a warrior scholar for the Galactic Union. He had walked on planets where the sky burned red and oceans floated above the ground. He had met species with 6 legs, 3 heads, and minds that could read thoughts from across a room. But nothing had prepared him for his first meeting with humans. The transport ship touched down on Kalos Prime just after dawn. The mining colony sat on the edge of known space, a place where the Union tested new species before allowing them full access to galactic civilization. Thalrix stepped off the ramp, his 4 arms adjusting the recording device on his chest. His job was simple: watch the humans, study them, and report back to the Council. The first human he met was Captain Byung-ho. The man stood outside the landing pad, his face covered in old scars and his uniform worn from years of use. He was small compared to Thalrix, barely reaching the Velkari's chest. When they shook hands, Thalrix could feel how fragile the human's bones were. One squeeze could break them. "Welcome to Kalos Prime," Byung-ho said. His voice was rough like stones grinding together. "I hope you brought comfortable shoes. We do a lot of walking here." Thalrix followed the captain through the colony. The human base was nothing impressive. Their weapons were old projectile firearms that would bounce off modern armor. Their buildings were simple metal structures that couldn't withstand a serious attack. Even their soldiers looked weak. They had no natural armor, no enhanced senses, no genetic advantages at all. They were just soft meat wrapped in thin skin. "These are my people," Byung-ho said, gesturing to a group of Marines running drills in the courtyard. "Corporal Daewon leads the first squad. Private Jihai is our best medic. The kid over there is Private Sunwoo. Just joined us 3 months ago." Thalrix watched them train. They moved slowly compared to other species. They got tired quickly. They needed water and rest breaks every few hours. In his report that night, Thalrix wrote, "Humans are physically inferior to all known combat species. Recommend limited military roles only." The days passed quietly. Thalrix observed the humans as they went about their duties. He noticed strange things about them. They told jokes while cleaning their weapons. They gave their equipment personal names. Corporal Daewon called his rifle Old Betty and spoke to it like a friend. Private Jihi had photos of her family taped inside her helmet. They seemed to treat war like a personal matter rather than a professional duty. "Why do you do that?" Thalrix asked Daewon one afternoon. The corporal was polishing his rifle with careful attention. "Do what?" Daewon replied without looking up. "Treat your weapon like it has feelings. It is just a tool." Daewon smiled. "Old Betty has saved my life 17 times. That makes her more than a tool. That makes her family." Thalrix didn't understand. In Velkari culture, weapons were replaced when they became outdated. Efficiency was everything. Emotion had no place in military operations. He made another note in his report. Humans display illogical emotional attachment to equipment. This may cause problems in combat situations. On the 7th day, everything changed. The attack came without warning. One moment, Thalrix was eating lunch in the commissary. The next moment, alarms were screaming and the walls were shaking. He ran outside and saw the sky filled with ships. Not Union ships. Something else. Something that made his blood turn cold. "Fractal swarm," someone shouted. "They're everywhere!" The swarm was supposed to be extinct. The Union had wiped them out 300 years ago. They were parasitic creatures that infected other species and turned them into mindless killing machines. Seeing them now pouring out of the sky like black rain, Thalrix felt fear for the first time in decades. The Union forces responded immediately. Advanced battlesuits activated, energy weapons charged. Defensive shields went up around the main buildings. The Union soldiers were professional and efficient. They followed their training exactly as they had been taught, and they died. The swarm moved like nothing Thalrix had ever seen. They adapted to every weapon in seconds. Energy blasts that should have killed them just made them stronger. Defensive shields that should have held for hours broke in minutes. The creatures learned, evolved, and overcame every advantage the Union forces had. Thalrix watched in horror as his fellow Velkari warriors fell. They had been trained for thousands of years in the art of combat. They had technology that could destroy planets. But against the swarm, they were helpless. The creatures moved too fast, hit too hard, and never stopped coming. "Fall back," the Union commander ordered. "Retreat to the ships. We need reinforcements." Thalrix ran toward the landing pads. His forearms clutched his weapon, but he knew it was useless. The swarm had already adapted to Velkari firearms. He was running for his life. abandoning the colony and everyone in it. It was the logical choice. The smart choice. The only choice that made sense. Then he heard something that stopped him in his tracks. "Hold the line." Captain Byung-ho's voice roared across the battlefield. "No one gets through." "Not one." Thalrix turned and saw something impossible. The human detachment wasn't retreating. They stood in formation at the colony's main gate, firing their primitive weapons at the swarm. The creatures that had torn through advanced Union forces were being held back by humans with old rifles and determination. Private Sun Woo was shaking with fear, but he kept firing. Private Ji-hai was pulling wounded soldiers to safety while shooting one-handed. Corporal Dae-won stood in front of them all, Old Betty barking thunder as he picked off swarm creatures one by one. "What are they doing?" Thalrix whispered. "They're going to die." A wounded Union soldier stumbled past him, bleeding from multiple wounds. "The humans, they won't leave. They say someone has to buy time for the evacuation." Thalrix looked back at his escape ship. Then he looked at the humans. Logic said to run. Training said to run. Every instinct in his body said to run. But something about those small, fragile creatures standing against impossible odds made him hesitate. Captain Byung-ho caught his eye across the battlefield. The human captain didn't say anything. He just nodded once, then turned back to the fight. Thalrix made a decision that would change his life forever. He turned away from the ship and ran toward the humans. He didn't know why. He couldn't explain it. But something in that moment told him that running would mean missing something important, something legendary. The battle raged around them as Thalrix took his position beside Corporal Dae-won. The human glanced at him with surprise. "Thought you'd be on a ship by now," Dae-won said, never stopping his fire. "I thought so too," Thalrix replied. "But I have a feeling you're going to need an extra pair of hands. Or 4. Dae-won smiled, and in that smile, Thalrix saw something he had never seen before in any species. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't bravery. It was something simpler and more terrifying. It was the absolute refusal to quit. The industrial district burned. Smoke rose from a dozen fires, turning the sky black. Explosions echoed through the streets as the swarm tore through buildings looking for survivors. Thalrix and the human squad were trapped 3 blocks from the main defensive line, cut off by hundreds of the creatures. "We need to move," Lieutenant Hae-jin said, checking her tactical display. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes and a mind that never stopped calculating. "If we stay here, we die. If we try to reach the main force, we probably die. But probably is better than definitely. I count 200 hostiles between us and safety," Sergeant Young-soo added. He was shorter than the other humans and had a habit of making jokes at bad times. "That's only 40 each if we divide them equally. I call dibs on the easy ones." "There are no easy ones," Private Sun Woo whispered. His hand shook as he reloaded his rifle. "They're all going to kill us." "Not if we kill them first," Corporal Dae-won said. He put a hand on Sun Woo's shoulder. "Stay close to me, kid. I'll get you home." Thalrix watched this exchange with confusion. These humans knew they were likely going to die. The numbers didn't lie. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. Any logical species would surrender or hide. But humans didn't seem to understand logic the way other species did. "Why don't you run?" Thalrix asked. "Scatter in different directions. Some of you might survive." Captain Byung-ho looked at him like he had said something strange. "We're Marines. We don't leave our brothers behind. We fight together or we die together. Those are the only 2 options." They moved through the burning district in tight formation. Thalrix had fought alongside many species, but he had never seen tactics like this. The humans didn't try to avoid danger. They ran toward it. When they spotted swarm creatures, they didn't take cover and fire from safety. They charged forward, drawing the enemy's attention away from wounded soldiers. Private Ji-hai spotted a Valkyrie soldier, trapped under a collapsed wall. The soldier was twice her size and covered in armor. "Help me!" she shouted, running toward him. "Leave him," Lieutenant Hae-jin ordered. "We don't have time." Ji-hai ignored the order. She reached the Valkyrie and started digging through the rubble with her bare hands. Swarm creatures saw her and began moving closer. She didn't stop digging. Thalrix ran to help her, using his forearms to lift the heavy debris. "You should have listened to your commander," he said. "Probably," Ji-hai replied, pulling the injured Valkyrie free. "But I didn't become a medic to leave people behind." They got the soldier out just as the swarm creatures reached them. Corporal Dae-won and Sergeant Young-soo opened fire, cutting down the creatures before they could attack. Jihai dragged the wounded Velkari toward safety, her small human frame somehow carrying a weight that should have been impossible. "That's 3 times today," Young-Soo said, reloading his weapon. 3 times we should have died but didn't. I think the universe likes us." "Or the universe has terrible aim," Dae-won replied. They fought their way through the industrial district for 2 hours. Every minute brought new horrors. The swarm was everywhere. They climbed walls, dropped from ceilings, and burst through floors. But the humans kept moving forward. When they ran out of ammunition, they used knives. When their knives broke, they used their hands. When they were wounded, they kept fighting. Thalric saw Private Sunwoo take a hit that should have killed him. A swarm creature's claw pierced his shoulder, and he screamed in pain. But instead of falling, he grabbed the creature's arm and held it in place while Sergeant Young-Soo shot it. The kid was crying and bleeding, but he never let go. "Good job, Sunwoo," Byung-ho said, helping the private to his feet. "You just saved Young-Soo's life." "I did?" Sunwoo asked, looking shocked. "You did. Now let Jihai patch you up so you can save a few more." They reached a warehouse that was still standing. Lieutenant Haejin checked her tactical display and cursed. The main defensive line fell. "Command is ordering all units to retreat to the landing pads." "How long do we have?" Byung-ho asked. 15 minutes before the last ships leave. Thalrix calculated quickly. They were 20 minutes from the landing pads at full speed. With wounded soldiers, it would take 30 minutes. "We won't make it," he said. "No," Byung-ho agreed. "We won't." The humans were quiet for a moment. Then Young-Soo started laughing. It was a strange sound in the middle of all the death and fire. "You know what's funny? We came to this rock to mine minerals. Now we're going to become minerals." "That's not funny," Sunwoo said. "It's a little funny," Dae-won admitted. "Focus," Haejin snapped. "We have wounded. We have civilians trapped in the southern sector, and we have about 1,000 swarm creatures between us and anything resembling safety. Captain, what are your orders?" Byung-ho looked at his soldiers. They were exhausted, wounded, and running on nothing but willpower. Any commander with sense would order them to save themselves. But as Thalrix was learning, humans didn't always make sense. "We hold here," Byung-ho said. "We buy time for the evacuation. Every minute we keep the swarm busy is another minute for civilians to escape." "Sir," Haejin said carefully, "if we stay here, we die." "I know, all of us. I know, just making sure we're clear on that." Byung-ho smiled. "Crystal clear, Lieutenant. Now let's make our last stand count for something." They fortified the warehouse as best they could. Young-Soo set up explosive traps at every entrance. Dae-won found a good firing position on the 2nd floor. Jihai established a medical station in the back. Sunwoo stood near the main door, his rifle ready despite his wounded shoulder. Thalrix watched them prepare to die. They didn't cry. They didn't beg. They didn't try to negotiate or find a clever way out. They just accepted their fate and decided to make it expensive for the enemy. "This is insane," Thalrix said. "You're throwing your lives away." "No," Byung-ho replied. "We're spending our lives. There's a difference. Throwing away suggests waste. This isn't waste. This is the job, but why? Why die for people you don't know?" The captain looked at him with those scarred, tired eyes. "Because somebody has to. Because if everyone runs, everyone dies. Because sometimes the only way forward is to plant your feet and say not one more step." The swarm hit them like a wave. They came from every direction at once, hundreds of creatures trying to overwhelm the warehouse. Young-Soo's explosives killed dozens. Dae-won's rifle fire cut down dozens more, but they kept coming. Thalrix fought beside them, his forearms moving in patterns he had learned over centuries of combat. But he noticed something strange. The humans were better fighters than they should be. Sunwoo had only 3 months of training, but he fought like a veteran. Jihai was a medic, not a soldier. But she shot with deadly accuracy. Even their wounds didn't slow them down the way they should. "How are you doing this?" Thalrix shouted over the gunfire. "Your species should be weak." "We are weak," Dae-won shouted back. "That's why we have to fight so hard." A massive explosion shook the building. Young-Soo had detonated the main charges, collapsing the northern entrance. He was still inside when he did it. Thalrix saw him in the split second before the explosion, saw him smiling and giving a thumbs up. "Tell them we were here." Young-Soo's voice came through the radio. "Tell them we mattered." Then fire and thunder, and Young-Soo was gone. The survivors held the warehouse for 7 more minutes. Every second was paid for in blood. When the eastern wall finally collapsed, they fell back to the second floor. When the second floor became overrun, they retreated to the roof. There were only 6 of them left now. Byung-ho, Haejin, Daewon, Ji-hai, Sunwoo, and Thalrix. They stood back to back on the roof, surrounded by thousands of swarm creatures, with no ammunition left and no hope of rescue. "It's been an honor," Byung-ho said. "Likewise," Captain Haejin replied. Sunwoo was crying. "I don't want to die." "Then live," Daewon told him. "Live right now in this moment. Make it count." The swarm began climbing the walls. This was the end. But Thalrix noticed the humans weren't afraid anymore. They had gone past fear into something else. Something that made them raise their empty weapons and prepare for hand-to-hand combat against impossible odds. And in that moment, Thalrix understood. Humans weren't strong because they couldn't die. They were strong because they could die and chose to fight anyway. The rescue came from an unexpected direction. A civilian transport ship piloted by a crazy engineer named Hyo-rin crashed through the swarm and landed on the warehouse roof. The side door opened and a woman's voice screamed, "Get in if you want to live!" They didn't need to be told twice. The survivors scrambled into the transport as swarm creatures grabbed at their legs. Thalrix was last aboard, using his forearms to hold back the creatures while the humans pulled him inside. The door slammed shut just as claws scraped against the metal. "Hyo-rin?" Captain Byung-ho stared at the pilot. "You were supposed to evacuate 3 hours ago." "I got bored," Hyo-rin replied, pulling the ship into the air. She was young, maybe 25 in human years, with oil stains on her face and a wild look in her eyes. "Also, I heard you guys needed a ride." "You came back into a war zone to give us a ride?" "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds stupid. But yeah, basically." The ship shook as swarm creatures jumped onto the hull. Hyo-rin cursed and pushed the engines harder. "Hold on, this is going to be rough." They flew low over the burning colony, dodging swarm ships and falling debris. Thalrix looked out the window and saw the truth. The colony was lost. The Galactic Union forces had already evacuated. Only scattered groups of defenders remained, and they were being overrun. "Where are we going?" Lieutenant Haejin asked. "Command center," Byung-ho replied. "It's the last strong point. If there are any survivors, they'll be there." "Sir, the command center is surrounded. We can't land there. Then we'll crash there." "Hyo-rin, can you do that?" The engineer grinned. "Captain, I can crash anywhere you want. I'm an excellent crasher." They reached the command center and found it under siege. 40 defenders, human and alien, held the building against thousands of swarm creatures. Bodies were piled high around the walls. The defenders were down to their last ammunition. It was only a matter of time. Hyo-rin didn't land. She crashed. The ship hit the ground hard, skidding across the courtyard and crushing swarm creatures under its hull. The door opened and Byung-ho's team rushed out, joining the desperate defense. "Reinforcements!" someone shouted. "We got reinforcements." "6 people isn't reinforcements," another voice replied. "It's just more bodies for the pile." But those 6 people made a difference. Corporal Daewon sat up on the wall and started picking off swarm creatures with perfect accuracy. Private Ji-hai began treating wounded defenders with speed and skill. Even young Sunwoo, wounded and exhausted, found a second wind and fought like a demon. Thalrix found the ranking officer, a Velkari commander named Treshkor. "What's the situation?" he asked. "We're dead," Treshkor replied simply. "Union command has written off Kalos Prime. No reinforcements are coming. We have maybe an hour of ammunition left. After that, it's hand-to-hand combat until they kill us all. Then we evacuate. To where? The swarm controls the sky. Any ship that tries to leave gets shot down. We're trapped." Thalrix looked around the command center. 40 defenders, maybe a dozen different species. All of them knowing they were going to die. But none of them running. None of them giving up. The humans had taught them something, he realized. Not tactics or strategy. Something deeper. Captain Byung-ho climbed onto a damaged vehicle so everyone could see him. "Listen up!" he shouted. "I know you're scared. I know you think we're going to die here. You're probably right, but I need to tell you something important." The defenders stopped what they were doing to listen. "I've studied military history my entire life," Byung-ho continued. "I know about the great battles, the famous victories, the wars that changed galaxies. But you know what I remember most? I remember the last stands, the battles that were lost but never forgotten. Thermopylae, the Alamo, Rorke's Drift. battles where small groups of soldiers held against impossible odds. He paused, looking at each face. Those soldiers didn't win. Most of them died, but they mattered. Their sacrifice bought time. Their courage inspired others. Their last stand became legend, and hundreds of years later, people still remember their names. We're not going to survive today, but we can make it mean something. We can hold this line. We can buy time for the evacuation ships to escape, and someday someone will tell the story of what happened here. The day that 40 defenders held back 10,000 enemies. The day that we said not one more step. Silence fell over the command center. Then a Velkari soldier raised his weapon. For Kalos Prime. For Kalos Prime. The others echoed, but Captain Byung-ho wasn't finished. He turned to Lieutenant Hae-jin. How long would it take to collapse the mine shafts under the command center? She understood immediately. With the right explosives, maybe 15 minutes. But it would bury everything. The command center, the swarm, and us. If we can't win, we take them with us. How many swarm creatures can we trap? Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands if we time it right. Byung-ho looked at his soldiers. Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. I won't think less of you. But I'm staying. I'm setting those charges, and I'm taking as many of those things with me as possible. Nobody moved to leave. All right then, the captain said. Let's build a legend. They worked quickly. Hyorin and Hae-jin rigged explosives throughout the underground mine shafts. The defenders prepared for the final battle, knowing each minute they held was another minute of preparation. Specialist Minna, the communications officer, stayed at her station broadcasting their situation to anyone who might hear. This is Kalos Prime, Minna said into the microphone. We are under attack by the rectal swarm. Our position is overrun. This may be our last transmission. If anyone can hear this, please remember us. Please remember that we fought. That we mattered. That we refused to give up even when all hope was gone. She kept broadcasting even as the swarm began breaking through the walls. Her voice carried across the galaxy, a final message from soldiers who would not surrender. The swarm's final assault began at sunset. They came from every direction, a black tide of death. The defenders met them with everything they had left. Bullets, grenades, improvised explosives, and when those ran out, bare hands and desperation. Private Jae-sung, a sniper Thalrix hadn't met before, held the western choke point alone. His rifle barked with mechanical precision. One shot, one kill. One shot, one kill. He fired until his ammunition was gone, until his rifle overheated, until swarm creatures finally dragged him down. In those 7 minutes, he killed 47 enemies by himself. Engineer Hyorin fought with tools instead of weapons. A welding torch became a flamethrower. A power drill became a spear. When swarm creatures broke through the southern door, she sealed it shut with her own body until others could weld it closed. She survived, but barely. Private Ji-hai and Corporal Daewon fought back-to-back in the main hall, exactly as they had joked about during training. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They moved like two parts of one machine, covering each other's blind spots, sharing their last ammunition, refusing to fall. Young Sun-woo discovered something that day. He discovered that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's fighting despite the fear. His hands never stopped shaking, but he never stopped shooting. When his rifle jammed, he fixed it with trembling fingers and kept fighting. When he was wounded again, he let Ji-hai patch him up and returned to the line. Thalrix fought harder than he had ever fought in his life. His forearms were covered in black swarm blood. His armor was cracked and dented, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Not while these fragile humans kept fighting beside him. The command center fell floor by floor. The defenders retreated to the second level, then the third, then the roof. Behind them, Lieutenant Hae-jin armed the final demolition sequence. 30 seconds until detonation. 30 seconds until the entire complex collapsed, burying the swarm and the defenders together. Charges are armed, Hae-jin shouted. Everyone off the roof. Find cover. There is no cover, someone replied. That's when Thalrix heard it. A sound that shouldn't exist. The sound of Union battlecruisers breaking through the atmosphere. Specialist Minna's broadcast had reached them. The cavalry was coming. We did it, Byung-ho whispered. We bought enough time. Union ships opened fire, destroying swarm vessels by the dozen. Dropships descended toward the command center. But the demolition charges were already armed. They couldn't be stopped. Everyone down, Hae-jin screamed. The world exploded. Fire and thunder consumed the command center. The mine shafts collapsed, swallowing thousands of swarm creatures into the darkness below. The ground shook like the planet itself was dying. When the dust cleared, Thalrix was buried under rubble. He couldn't move, couldn't see, couldn't breathe. But he was alive. Barely. Rescue teams dug for 3 days. They pulled bodies from the ruins. Some were alive. Most were not. When they finally reached Thalrix, he was unconscious, protected by Captain Byung-ho's body. The captain had thrown himself over the Valkyrie in those final seconds, using his own body as a shield. Byung-ho was dead. But Thalrix lived and the legend was born. Thalrix woke up 3 days later in a Union medical ship. His body was covered in bandages and his arms were secured in healing frames. Everything hurt. But he was alive, which was more than he deserved after leaving so many behind. "Welcome back," a familiar voice said. Private Ji-hai stood beside his bed wearing a medical uniform. Her left arm was in a cast and she had burns across half her face, but she was smiling. "You've been out for 72 hours. How do you feel?" "Like I died," Thalrix croaked. "Close, you nearly did. Captain Byung-ho saved you. He used his own body to shield you from the blast." Her smile faded. "He didn't make it." The words hit Thalrix harder than any swarm attack. Captain Byung-ho was dead. The man who had shown him what true courage looked like. The man who had turned a retreat into a legend. Dead because he chose to protect an alien he had known for less than a week. "How many survived?" Thalrix asked. 11 humans, 4 aliens, 15 out of 40. Ji-hai's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "Young-soo died in the warehouse. Jae-sung died holding the western choke point. Minna died at her station, still broadcasting. The captain died protecting you. Most of the others didn't make it through the collapse. 15 survivors out of 40 defenders, against 10,000 swarm creatures. By any logical measure, it was a disaster. But Thalrix knew the truth. Those 40 defenders had held long enough for thousands of civilians to evacuate. They had turned certain defeat into a costly victory for the enemy. They had mattered. "I need to write my report," Thalrix said. "You need to rest," Ji-hai replied. "The report can wait." "No, it can't. The galaxy needs to know what happened here." "What you did. What they all did." Ji-hai looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll bring you a data pad." Over the next week, Thalrix wrote the most important document of his life. He didn't just record facts and figures. He told the story. The story of how humans fought when they should have run. How they died so others could live. How they turned their last stand into something that would echo across the stars. Other survivors added their own accounts. Lieutenant Hai-jin described the battle with clinical precision, noting every tactical decision and its outcome. Corporal Dae-won wrote about the soldiers who fell, making sure each name was remembered. Even young Sun-woo, who had lost his left arm in the fighting, contributed his memories of Sergeant Young-soo's final moments. Engineer Hyo-rin didn't write anything. Instead, she salvaged Old Betty, Corporal Dae-won's rifle. The weapon had been buried in rubble, but still worked. She cleaned it, repaired it, and mounted it in a case with a plaque that read, "She saved 17 lives." Then she saved 17 more. News of the Battle of Kalos Prime spread across the Galactic Union. At first, the reports were simple casualty lists and strategic summaries. But then the recordings surfaced. Specialist Mina's broadcasts, security footage from the command center, personal messages that soldiers had recorded before they died. The galaxy watched humans fight. Really fight. Not the sanitized combat of modern warfare, where drones and energy weapons did the killing from safety. This was brutal, personal, desperate fighting where every inch mattered and every second was paid for in blood. Other species began talking. The Valkyrie military commanders studied the battle for tactical lessons. The Thoros philosophers debated the ethics of sacrifice. The Krell historians compared it to ancient battles from their own past. Everyone had an opinion about humans and what Kalos Prime meant. "They're too dangerous," some said. "A species that fights like that cannot be trusted. They'll drag us all into wars we don't want." "They're too valuable," others argued. "A species that fights like that could save the Union. When the next crisis comes, we'll need them." "They're too strange," most concluded. "We don't understand them. How can we integrate a species that defies every logical rule of warfare?" The Union Council called an emergency session to debate humanity's place in galactic civilization. Thalrix was summoned to testify. He arrived at the council chambers 3 weeks after the battle, still healing but determined to speak. The council was massive. Representatives from 50 species sat in the great hall, each one powerful and ancient. Thalrix felt small standing before them, but he remembered standing beside humans against impossible odds. That gave him strength. Observer Thalrix, the council speaker began. You have submitted a detailed report on the human military capabilities. Your conclusions are unusual. Yes, council speaker. You claim that humans, despite being technologically inferior and physically weak, represent a significant military asset to the Union. You base this on a single battle where most of the human forces died. Explain your reasoning. Thalrix chose his words carefully. Humans don't fight like other species. They don't calculate odds or measure risks. They fight for each other. When a human says they won't leave anyone behind, they mean it literally. They will die to save strangers. They will sacrifice everything for abstract ideas like honor or duty. This makes them unpredictable and dangerous, yes, but it also makes them unstoppable when properly motivated. But they lost, a Thoros representative pointed out. Most of them died. How is that an asset? They lost the battle but won the war. Their last stand bought time for thousands to evacuate. The swarm lost tens of thousands of creatures taking Kalos Prime. That colony was supposed to fall in hours. Humans made it cost days. Every battle the swarm fights against humans will be expensive. Eventually the swarm will learn to avoid them. Or destroy them completely, a Krell representative suggested. Perhaps, Thalrix agreed. But I wouldn't bet against humanity. I've seen what happens when you corner them. They bite back. The debate continued for hours. Thalrix answered every question, defended every conclusion, and refused to back down from his central point. Humans were special. Not because they were strong or smart or technologically advanced. They were special because they refused to accept defeat as inevitable. Finally, the council speaker called for a vote. All those in favor of granting humanity full military integration status? The vote was close. 27 in favor, 23 against. Humanity would be welcomed into the Galactic Union's military forces. Not as auxiliaries or support personnel, but as full combat troops. After the session ended, Thalrix returned to his quarters and found a message waiting. It was from Earth's military command. Simple and direct, exactly like the humans themselves. We heard about the vote. Thank you for speaking on our behalf. Our people were honored to serve alongside yours at Kalos Prime. Captain Byung-ho's family has been informed of his sacrifice and sends their gratitude. When you need us again, we'll be there. No demands for recognition. No requests for special treatment. Just a promise that when the call came, they would answer. That was humanity in a nutshell. They didn't ask for respect. They earned it. They didn't demand to be heroes. They became heroes by doing what needed to be done. Thalrix visited the survivors in their recovery facilities. Private Sunwoo was learning to use a prosthetic arm, working with a determination that would have impressed his fallen comrades. Lieutenant Heijin was already back on duty, training new recruits with the lessons learned from Kalos Prime. Corporal Daewon had been promoted to sergeant and was preparing to return to active service. How are you adjusting? Thalrix asked Daewon during one visit. The sergeant shrugged. Every day I wake up and remember the ones who didn't. Young-soo, Mina, Jae-sung, the captain. I think about what they did, what they sacrificed. Then I get up and try to be worthy of it. You fought beside them. You are worthy? Maybe, but I have to prove it every day. That's the burden of survival. We have to live lives that justify their sacrifice. Thalrix understood. He felt the same burden. Captain Byung-ho had died protecting him. That debt could never be fully repaid, but it could be honored. By living well. By fighting well. By making sure their story was remembered. The monuments were built 6 months later. On Kalos Prime, now cleared of swarm infestation, a memorial wall listed every defender who had fallen. Their names were carved in stone that would last millennia. Above the names, a simple inscription. They held the line. They bought time. They refused to surrender. Remember them. Tourists would visit in the years to come. School children would learn about the Battle of Kalos Prime. Military academies would study the tactics and strategies. But Thalrix knew the real lesson wasn't about tactics. It was about spirit. About the decision to stand when logic said to run. About the choice to fight when defeat seemed certain. Humanity had shown the galaxy something it had forgotten during centuries of peace. War wasn't about technology or numbers. It was about will. And humans had more will than any species Thalrix had ever encountered. The swarm returned, of course. They always did. But this time the galaxy was ready. And standing at the front of the defense were human soldiers, carrying weapons named after friends, fighting for strangers, and refusing to back down. The legend of Kalos Prime spread across the stars, carried by survivors and witnesses. And with it, the understanding that humanity wasn't just another species joining the Galactic Union. They were the species that would change everything.